What shocks me is he's remained silent on the travesty that happened on our southern border. Many people died. Thousands of people died. I've met with hundreds.
Suddenly he gives a shit about people dying? Really? Come on. This is Tom Homan, the head of ICE. He is effectively kind of plays the same role as... Well, there isn't really an exact comparison between a role in Germany and a role in the United States, but he kind of plays the same role as like Himmler, I suppose, to some degree, if Himmler's roles were split up a bunch. Or maybe Ernst Röhm. Yeah, maybe Ernst Röhm. I would say that's more accurate. Ernst Röhm, the head of the brown shirts until he was killed.
Of angel moms and dads who buried their children that were murdered by illegal alien. How many angel moms and dads has he met in the state of Maryland? That's what concerns me.
And on the politics, Republicans are right. But
no, they're absolutely not. And Tom Homan is an evil monster. Like, if we're lucky, in 50 years, our history books will say, they'll list him, and next to his face will be, you know, the words evil monster, if we're lucky. He is as evil as any Nazi, Homan is. They're indistinguishable. He is a Nazi. And Ben Shapiro should recognize that. You can't convince me that Ben Shapiro doesn't recognize the fact that Homan is a Nazi.
But do the law right also, and you'll have longer lasting victories, because otherwise, many of the things the Trump administration is trying to do are going to get reversed on appeal. And that would be really bad for the Trump
there you go
administration as well. You know?
So this is Shapiro's way of pushing back on Homan without actually disagreeing with him for all intents and purposes. By the way, guys, check out my new shop, owenmorgan.com/shop. I have a bunch of really cool designs on there.
Rooting for the Trump administration to do all of this right so its policies actually work. The same thing holds true with regard to Harvard. So the Trump administration is admirably going after the endowment of Harvard University.
Admirably? This is another example of fascism in action. I'm sorry, I'm stopping a lot. I'm going to let this play through in a second, the whole thing. But Trump is using this, you know, this Harvard thing as an opportunity to consolidate his power. He is forcing Harvard to deplatform people that are critical of Donald Trump and stuff, and, you know, other people like that. He's trying to force Harvard to deplatform those people, and Harvard is not capitulating, and that's a good sign. That's a good sign. That is a sign that fascism may not completely take over. If there's pushback by these organizations, we may not have a full fascist takeover. We need to see more pushback like what Harvard is doing, but it's illegal what Trump is doing. You can't do that. And it's a very clear example of a power grab. And Ben went to Harvard, so I'll be interested to see what he has to say. Now, let's just listen to the whole thing in context.
Are going to get reversed on appeal, and that would be really bad for the Trump administration as well. Again, I'm rooting for the Trump administration to do all of this right so its policies actually work. The same thing holds true with regard to Harvard. So the Trump administration is admirably going after the endowment of Harvard University.
Admirably.
Which is great. They should. Harvard University is a travesty. Again, that is my alma mater. I went there for law school. They're very rich. And there's no reason why Harvard University should be treated with kid gloves. Their endowment is $53 billion.
Yeah, do you know why? Do you know what they're doing with that money? Harvard is filthy rich. Like, they have a lot of money in the bank, and they... Like any nonprofit, I think Harvard is a nonprofit. This is how nonprofits work. They have shitloads of money in the bank, and they pay operating expenses out of the interest gained from the money. So you got $1 million in the bank, for example. It gains, I don't know, 3% interest per year, right? That's $30,000 a year. That's enough to pay one person $30,000 a year to do a job. If Harvard has, like, you know, $1 billion in the bank, which I don't know if they do, I'm not sure. And the interest is probably closer to like 2%, I would venture to guess. You're looking at, I don't know, 50 employees or 100 employees at $100,000 a year or something like that. That's where Harvard's money goes. The grants that they receive go toward funding research studies. So, like, the reason that we could get a vaccine push out as quickly as we did is because the federal government invested in research studies into, like, mRNA technology. and other shit. It's not just like vaccines. The US government invests in drug research and all kinds of other shit, legal research and everything. That's what that money is for. So by canceling these grants, by preventing Harvard from getting paid, they are ending research at Harvard. They are doing what's called brain drain. They're killing any scientific advancement, any philosophical advancement, any advancement whatsoever. And Harvard is stuck just paying its employees to continue to like do the work that it does. Don't get me wrong. Harvard is very, very, very rich. But Ben Shapiro has to know that that's not how any of this works. He has to know what he's talking about here, right? He can't possibly not know that he's full of shit right now. Cancer research, too. Yes, cancer research. It's not like forcing Harvard to pay for it itself. It just can't pay for it. It just cannot pay for those. It can't cover the grants because the U.S. government has way more money to put into grants than Harvard. And the thing about, running off of operating expenses the way that nonprofits do is you may have a shitload of money, but you're very limited in how much you can spend at any given moment. You have to write up a budget for the year and everything else. You can't just you can't just go spend, billions because you want to. It's not how it works. And Ben Shapiro must know that. He must.
Massive endowment. These major universities have the GDPs of small countries. It's unbelievable. The Trump administration.
The GDPs? You think Harvard has a GDP? Okay, whatever.
According to the Wall Street Journal, has now grown so furious with Harvard University after a week of an escalating dispute between the two sides, it is planning to pull an additional $1 billion of the school's funding for health research, according to people familiar with the matter. Trump administration officials thought the long list of demands they sent Harvard last Friday was a confidential starting point for negotiations. Instead, Harvard released the letter to the public. Before Monday, the administration was planning to treat Harvard more leniently than it had Columbia University. Now officials want to apply even more pressure to the nation.
So he's saying that the Trump regime tried to blackmail Harvard into deplatforming people that Donald Trump doesn't like. And instead, Harvard released the blackmail letter that was sent. That's what I'm picking up here. And now Trump is, causing even more problems for Harvard. This is the very definition of, what's the word I'm looking for? It's the definition of fascism. This is fascism. And Ben cannot not know this. You cannot convince me.
Nation's most prominent university, according to those people. There's a lot of talk about the attempt to remove nonprofit status from Harvard University. The task force thought Harvard would concede. Instead, Harvard decided to make itself the centerpiece of this issue.
You think Harvard made themselves the centerpiece of the issue? Trump trying to blackmail them made them the centerpiece.
Now, the Trump administration could have won a very easy victory here, and they still may win a victory here. It'll be harder fought. They could easily have simply said to Harvard University that unless it complied with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, the necessary consequences would follow. Its aid would go away, for example, and then been very meticulous about the list they put forward. Instead, they put forward a very broad list of things they wanted Harvard University to do, including reconstitute its board, reconstitute its professoriate. And listen, those are all things that are good and should happen to Harvard University. Absolutely.
Now, what happened to small government? Where did all that go? Where did small government Ben go? This is literally the government imposing its will on the private sector. What? How can you possibly be in favor of this?
Will they be upheld in a court of law? That is a little unclear. Again, Harvard, for all the problems with Harvard, there's some good lawyers who work there and very expensive lawyers who work there. I want to see the Trump administration's measures against Harvard University maintained, which is, again, why meticulousness should be the order of the day.
I'm just it's so mind-blowing to me that Ben Shapiro is willing to take this step to usher in full-blown fascism, to advocate for full-blown fascism like this. As somebody who has made Israel a fundamental part of his personality, it just blows me away.
Okay, meanwhile, the Defense Department continues to roil with its own level of chaos. Now, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth appears to be under assault from people who are very much opposed to Pete Hegseth's view on the universe. And here I'm talking about isolationists within the Defense Department. There's this sort of bizarre narrative that's now being retailed that Hegseth is under assault from people who are quote unquote more interventionist in sort of their directionality. It's precisely the opposite. You can tell this from social media. The people who are currently assaulting Pete Hegseth are people opposed to Pete Hegseth because Pete Hegseth is too much in favor of peace through strength. So
Wait, he's too in favor of peace through strength?
Pete Hegseth, because Pete Hegseth is too much in favor of peace through strength.
Well, I mean, that's been the United States policy, peace through strength, for like ever. And it's been really, really useful, valuable. It's saved a lot of lives, a lot of, prevent a lot of wars. The Trump administration or the Trump regime is not doing peace through strength. They're doing, I'm a fucking moron that doesn't understand the first thing about literally anything that I'm doing. So I'm just going to do whatever I want all willy-nilly with absolutely no rhyme or reason or backup or like explanation or whatever. That's what's really happening. It's not a peace through strength type of deal.
So some of the people who are fired over the course of the last couple of weeks, allegedly for leaking to the press, are people who are very much allied with the isolationist wing of the Republican Party. And then many of them have been going around and mouthing off about it in public. That includes Dan Caldwell. Dan Caldwell was a member of the Defense Department.
Dude, I love how peaceful protest and using your First Amendment right to voice dissent is now mouthing off. Mouthing off publicly, no less. Can you imagine?
A top member of the Defense Department. He was appointed by people inside the Office of Personnel Management. The Office of Personnel Management is staffed by people who are very sympathetic to this point of view, apparently. Caldwell.
OPM is basically the office that Project 2025 people wanted to take over so that they could like impose their will on everything.
Was fired after allegations that he was leaking to the press, presumably people with whom he is friends, like Tucker Carlson, on whose podcast he appeared recently. And that is the kind of generalized suspicion. I don't know if that's true or not. Dan Caldwell went on Tucker's podcast on Monday and said he was not responsible for leaks that were used as, quote, justification for a purge that has caused turmoil at the Pentagon and prompted calls for Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to resign. And it is not quite a wonder as to who actually is calling for his resignation on the right. It's people who don't like the sort of Trumpian peace through strength.
No, peace through strength is a fine policy. I have no problem with that. Nobody has any problem with that. We have a problem with how fucking stupid these people are. I'm sorry, man. This is like really, really ridiculous.
Argument and are much more friendly to the sort of paleo-conservative isolationist wing of the Republican Party. Caldwell said, quote, I was out there advancing things a lot of people in the foreign policy establishment didn't want.
It's not peace through strength if there's no peace. Ben Shapiro is describing a scenario in which the Trump regime is sending people to like, bomb places and fight and shit. That's not peace. That's strength. Have a strong military to show that you're ready to go at a moment's notice, but don't go. That is the peace portion of it. Oh my God, people.
It doesn't justify what's happening to me, but let's just be honest. That's the nature of the games played in D.C. So he's claiming to Tucker Carlson that he was basically ousted by, quote unquote, the neocons, which is weird because he isn't naming who did the ousting precisely. He thinks his views contributed to his ouster. What's weird about that is, of course, there were a couple of other people who were fired from the Pentagon who actually don't hold those exact same views. Now, Caldwell himself is making very strong isolationist arguments, and he accuses there of being people who are just desperate for another war in the Middle East, which again is simplistic thinking. The idea
Simplistic thinking, he says. No, there are people for another war, or there are people desperate for another war, absolutely, in the Middle East, of course, and Ben Shapiro is one of them.
that, for example, if you wish for Israel to take out Iran's nuclear facilities, this means you want another war in the Middle East. That's just wrong on its face.
That would be the end result. That's what happens when you take out a sovereign country's whatever. If you bomb them, that's starting a war. What the fuck do you think would happen if Iran bombed the United States? It would lead to a war, of course. And we found a way out of this Iran situation without war. The Iran nuclear deal. They were abiding by the deal. They had agreed not to pursue nuclear proliferation, and they passed every inspection. They were not pursuing nuclear proliferation. And this dumb motherfucker, Donald Trump that is, canceled the deal anyway because Republicans fucking hated Obama and Trump fucking hated Obama, and the deal was negotiated not by Obama, but under Obama's administration, I think by John Kerry. So it's evil, it's bad, it's wrong. They're going to hate it and destroy it no matter what. That is an example of Republicans rejecting peace and embracing war. That is not peace through strength. That's war through you're a fucking moron.
The idea that you want another war in the Middle East if you want to stop the Houthis from, stopping all traffic in the Red Sea, which is something that Pete Hegseth has expressed support for, that means that you're a warmonger. That is an Obama-level foreign policy.
We can stop that shit without war. We can prevent these problems without going to war over them. The point is, your solution means war. Other solutions stop this stuff from happening without war. That's what makes you pro-war and me anti-war. Do I need to say this any slower? Like, I don't understand. Does he have gummy bears in his ears? What is happening? How does he not? He can't not know this, right?
The press attacks on Pete Hegseth, though, because, again, they agree with the Obama-level foreign policy. It's a horseshoe theory here. The New York Times and Dan Caldwell largely agree on foreign policy in a wide variety of ways. According to the New York Times, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth shared details about information about forthcoming strikes in Yemen on March 15th in a private Signal group chat that included his wife, brother, and personal lawyer.
Oh, yeah, I know what you're thinking when you hear this. You're thinking, oh, the Signal leak. Yeah, where Pete Hegseth was discussing war plans in Signal and leaked all this, it got out, and he shouldn't have been discussing it in there in the first place, right? No, wrong Signal leak. This is a second one. He did it again. This time, his wife was in the chat with him. Not only did he not learn from the last one, but he did it a second time. It's pretty clear now that he just doesn't give a fuck, right? And he's just going to continue discussing war plans on his iPhone app or whatever, right? It is the level of incompetence is mind-numbing. It is absolutely astounding.
According to 4 people with knowledge of the chat. And so now this is being used as another excuse to go after Pete Hegseth. Rumors started flying around.
Did you say excuse? An excuse to go after Pete Hegseth? He's literally discussing war plans on his iPhone app. You're supposed to do that shit in a secure bunker with lead walls, first of all. And second, he fucked up once, okay? That's a scandal. And then he fucked up a second time. He's completely incompetent and incapable of doing this job. It is so fucking stupid. I don't know what to do with it.
Now this is being used as another excuse to go after Pete Hegseth. Rumors started flying around yesterday that the Trump administration was going to look to alternatives for Hegseth. For the White House's part, they're denying that. Caroline Leavitt at the White House yesterday said this is not true. The Pentagon is working against Pete Hegseth specifically because, by the way, recruitment numbers are up because Pete Hegseth is cutting the waste and the fraud and the abuse over at the Pentagon. Because
I don't know if recruitment numbers are up. I'm not sure. Don't trust a word out of his mouth.
Pete Hegseth is a different kind of SecDef.
The president stands strongly behind Secretary Hegseth, who is doing a phenomenal job leading the Pentagon. And this is what happens when the entire Pentagon is working against you and working against the monumental change that you are trying to implement.
Yeah, he's a victim. Everybody in the Trump regime are victims. All along the way, they're all being victimized by the big, bad, evil left, who is simultaneously too weak and incompetent to govern effectively, but also too strong and powerful to overcome, right? Totally. Absolutely. One of my big problems with this whole, with all of this, with this regime, is that everybody along the way are really, and I'm not saying this is an insult. It's not insult. It's not supposed to be insulting. They're just really incompetent. They don't know what they're doing, any of them. Pete Hegseth is literally the last human being on planet Earth that should be in that position. He is not qualified to do that job, obviously. Trump is not hiring the best to do this. He's hiring the most loyal, who just so happen to be dumb as dog shit also. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter how fucking stupid these people are, or incompetent, or unknowledgeable, or inexperienced. In fact, a while back, Project 2025, they had training videos, and these training videos leaked, and I covered them at the time, many of them, Maybe all of them, I don't remember. And in the training videos, the guy that represented Project 2025 said, we are not going for people who are experienced anymore. Now we are looking for people with loyalty, who are loyal to the regime. And he framed it like it was a legitimate, like, political philosophy or whatever. No. There's nothing legitimate about that.
Secretary Hegseth was nominated for this position because he is standing up for the war fighter, the men and women in uniform who are putting their lives on the line to protect our country and our homeland. And
is that what you call it when the dude flagrantly disregards safety measures and like discusses literal war plans in an app on his iPhone instead of a lead-walled bunker, caring about veterans and shit? Is that what you call that? I mean, he's putting people in danger with this type of shit.
Fortunately, there have been people at that building who don't like the change the secretary is trying to bring, so they are leaking and they are lying to the mainstream media.
It's leaking. Leaking is the problem, not the fact that the motherfucker is using an app on his iPhone. That's not the problem.
The fact the White House is standing by Hegseth, that is, of course, the right move. Pete Hegseth yesterday was talking about his relationship with the White House. He says, listen, we're trying to fire leakers. That's what we are doing here.
Yeah, Hegseth is nothing if not a full propagandist, an expert propagandist, if you will. Has been for a very, very long time. He is absolutely, pretty much everything out of his mouth is a lie. And I remember watching this. His kids' faces in the background were really funny.
You know, what a big surprise that a few leakers get fired and suddenly a bunch of hit pieces come out from the same media that peddled the Russia hoax, won't give back their Pulitzers. They got Pulitzers for a bunch of lies. Pulitzers for...
Okay, the Russia thing, that wasn't a hoax. Russia genuinely, actually really did work with Donald Trump to get him elected. And the only reason he's not in prison is because Merrick Garland just chose not to prosecute soon enough, at the very least, because Robert Mueller believed that a sitting president can't be indicted, and a variety of other things, because shit just keeps working out in his favor. That's why.
For a bunch of lies and on hoaxes, time and time and time again. And as they peddle those lies, no one ever calls them on. See, this is what the media does. They take anonymous sources from disgruntled former employees.
Dude, look at his kids in the background. You seeing these kids? And what's with his voice cracking?
They take anonymous sources from disgruntled former employees, and then they try to slash and burn people.
You see these kids?
And ruin their reputations. Not going
I think those are his kids.
to work with me.
Okay, so the White House should stand by Hegseth. He was their pick. He was an out-of-the-box pick, and he remains the right pick for Secretary of Defense.
Not really. He's a terrible pick for Secretary of Defense.
Meanwhile, speaking of wrong picks, Steve Witkoff, who again, he's been trotted out there as some sort of negotiating genius. I would love to see the actual...
Oh, am I a chick? I heard that only chicks drink from straws. Does that make me a chick?
negotiating genius at some point of Steve Witkoff. So right now, he's leading negotiations over Ukraine, and he continues to make proposals that are geared presumably at granting carrots to the Russians. That is the only way to sort of read how Steve Witkoff is approaching these particular negotiations. The Ukrainian, I mean, Zelensky already came to the table. If the idea was get Zelensky to the table, the Trump administration has already accomplished this. And I took the Henry Kissinger position back in 2022, which is the Ukrainians.
Kissinger was a fucking monster. Why would you take that? Kissinger was such an interesting case study for me because Kissinger was a monster, a monstrously evil person, the architect of the Vietnam War. And if there were a hell, he would be there. He's the exact type of person that Republicans would make a whole like culture war issue out of, it seems to me. That they would, they'd say, oh, he's innocent, he's really a good guy, and all this other shit, when he's an absolute monster. And when he died, there was dead silence. Nothing. Nobody said a word. They were waiting for Donald Trump to weigh in, and he never did. So Kissinger just kind of died in obscurity, even though he was a massive story. His death was a massive story. The right just didn't really cover it. Fascinatingly. I remember when he died, Ron Filipkowski, maybe? He basically tweeted something like, that silence is the sound of Trump supporters waiting to find out if they liked Kissinger or not. And the silence just kind of continued. It just never stopped, fascinatingly. So anyway, I don't know. Kissinger is a super fascinating case study for me for that reason, because it kind of reveals exactly how the cult works, you know? Does he have a Nobel Peace Prize? Don't tell me he has a Nobel Peace Prize. Does Henry Kissinger have a Nobel Peace Prize? Don't tell me that. Does he? Oh my God, dude, he does. Okay. I have lost all respect for Nobel Peace Prizes. He is the last person to deserve a Nobel Peace Prize. That is absurd on levels I can't even articulate. He was a monstrously evil person that got countless people killed for no fucking reason. Yes, Henry Kissinger was awarded the Peace Prize in 1973. He received it jointly with North Vietnamese diplomat Le Duc Tho for their efforts in negotiating the Paris Peace Accords, which aimed to establish a ceasefire and end U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War. Is that right? However, the award was highly controversial. Yeah, it should have been. Le Duc Tho declined the prize, stating that peace had not been fully achieved in Vietnam. Wow, that's honorable. Kissinger accepted the award but did not attend the ceremony in Oslo, citing concerns over potential protests. The decision to award them the Peace Prize led to significant criticism, including the resignation of 2 members of the Nobel Committee in protest. In 1975, following the fall of Saigon and the end of the Vietnam War, Kissinger offered to return the Nobel Prize, but the Nobel Committee declined his offer. Wow. Wow, man. If Kissinger gets the Nobel Peace Prize, it truly has no meaning. He is the last human being on Earth that deserves the Peace Prize.
Needed to be brought to the table, but then so did the Russians. I mean, if you're going to have a deal, you need the Russians at the table too. And right now, all the focus of the Witkoff wing of the administration is get the Ukraine. Well, the Ukrainians already came. Zelensky already said he wants a 30-day ceasefire. Zelensky already is.
The problem, though, is that Russia never pays attention to the ceasefires. They ignore them completely. They agree to the ceasefire, and Putin keeps pushing inward. Like, Putin's word is as worthless as, like, his name. It means nothing. He can't be trusted for shit.
Granting this rare earth minerals deal, which is extremely, extremely favorable to the United States. He's already doing all of those things. The question is, what exactly is going to get Russia to the table? Witkoff's view seems to be that if he makes more overtures to the Russians, then magically Vladimir Putin is going to come to the table. So he wants the Ukrainians to basically declare that all the areas that Putin has occupied, even some areas that Putin has not occupied actually yet in the east of the country, that all those areas ought to be taken off the table and declared Russian annexed territory. He wants the Ukrainians to also agree that they will effectively never join NATO and give up, their sovereignty, because that's what that means. If you're not allowed to join, it's not that NATO has to accept Ukraine, but if Ukraine can never try to orient itself toward the West in order to appease Vladimir Putin, that's one of the things that Putin is looking for. Now, the question is, does Putin even want an off-ramp? Because right now, the other side of the table is, let's say you're Vladimir Putin, just switch the sides on the chess table for a second and play the other side of the chess table. You're not the United States anymore trying to get to an arrangement. You're Vladimir Putin. And what you've seen so far is that the United States is putting extraordinarily heavy pressure on the Ukrainians, and so far, no actual pressure on the Russians. In fact, the United States has cut off intelligence sharing with the Ukrainians. The United States is threatening to cut off aid to the Ukrainians, threatening to leave the negotiating table entirely. If you're Vladimir Putin, why don't you just wait out the United States? Why don't you just wait them out? Seriously, just wait them out. The Europeans probably can't fill the gap. Wait for the United States to get frustrated and leave, and then redouble your efforts.
Absolutely. Of course, that's what Putin is doing. Putin is an ex-KGB agent, like before the Soviet Union fell. The Soviet Union's fall, he wrote an essay, basically said, the fall of the Soviet Union is the greatest tragedy of the 20th century. I mean, I can think of a couple other ones that are a little bigger, but okay. He is a KGB agent at heart, and realistically, the Cold War never really ended. It ended for the United States because we stopped giving a shit, but it never ended for Russia. They continued to try to destroy the United States to the best of their ability. The Russians did. And they are succeeding gloriously right now. Donald Trump was the biggest gift that they could have been given. And it wasn't even a gift, it was manufactured, honestly, by Russia. They manufactured this whole thing with Donald Trump.
And go harder. Now, I don't think that's in the interest of the United States. I don't think that's in the interest of President Trump. President Trump correctly believes one of the most humiliating moments in American foreign policy history was the Taliban strolling through Kabul. That the Taliban taking over a country that the United States had abandoned, where we abandoned our allies under Joe Biden, was shameful and ugly and wrong.
The f*** are you talking about? We abandoned allies in Kabul. Is he saying that, like, I think he's talking about pulling out of Afghanistan. Brother, that was Trump's plan. Trump wrote that. Well, Trump's generals wrote it under Donald Trump, and it was signed by Trump. That wasn't even Biden's plan. Oh my God, dude. It is such complete horse shit. All the way down with this guy. It's constant. Laptop fund. And for straws, I use them. Also, greetings to our feline overload tail bass. I appreciate that. Well, only chicks use straws. Call me a chick. I was today years old when I realized Henry Kissinger was named Heinz Kissinger at birth. Ha! More laptop. I appreciate that. Heinz Kissinger. I didn't know that. It's interesting.
The United States allowing Vladimir Putin to stroll through Kyiv would have a significantly worse impact on America's foreign policy. I don't think President Trump wants that. And so what that means is that Steve Witkoff should start conveying messages to the other side of the negotiation as well, that they need to come to the table and spell out some actual consequences. Now, President Trump himself has said that. President Trump himself has said that there will be consequences to Russia if they don't come to the table. But those consequences need to be spelled out. In the meantime, other countries around the region are feeling very uneasy about this. This ranges from the Baltic states all the way up to Finland and Sweden, according to the Wall Street Journal. For a long time, the Nordic countries were better known for their peace efforts and cozy living than militarism. Now they're shedding that persona. The Nordics have emerged as a model for Europe's defense. They're leading efforts to reverse decades of military drawdowns to counter both Russian aggression and uncertain security guarantees from the Trump White House. The foreign main Nordic countries are among Europe's top donors of military aid to Ukraine by population. They're taking steps to usher in a new regional security architecture that's less reliant on the United States. Listen, that's great for the United States. If the Europeans can shoulder more of the burden, that's wonderful. That'd be good. The question is, how much of the burden are the Europeans actually willing to shoulder? Because the United States, in fact, has security interests in Ukraine that are not just European security interests. The question is, what are Russia's actual ambitions?
Like, the thing is, Russia actively wants to destroy the United States. So, I mean, Putin specifically, I know that Trump thinks that he is like best friends with him or whatever, but anything that Putin does for the United States or for Trump or whatever has the ultimate end goal of destroying the U.S. and Donald Trump. He is not trying to help us. It would be in our best interest, in Trump's best interest too, and everybody's, to fight against Russia at all costs, basically.
A little bit later this week, I'm going to go into extreme detail about what I believe Russia's ambitions are, because I've been spending the last week or so delving into the writings of the man known as Putin's brain, Alexander Dugin. And so I think I have a pretty good insight into what exactly Russia is looking for here. And it is not an off-ramp. Meanwhile,
No, it's not. He's absolutely correct. It's not an off-ramp. He's looking for an opportunity to destroy the United States at any cost and to rebuild the Soviet Union. That's what he's trying to do. If Ben Shapiro is really like, I don't know, I haven't heard anything that I disagree with so far, I don't think, from Shapiro on this specific subject. If he's been reading about Putin and everything, then I have to wonder if he's changed his opinion on Ukraine and stuff. Anybody with half a brain knows that it benefits us to work with Ukraine.
with regard to Ukraine and Russia, Vladimir Putin made the cynical move of declaring a 24-hour ceasefire around Easter, which apparently he then violated by...
Oh, yeah, he violates all of them. It's not a surprise. It would be surprised if he respected them.
Not sending missiles, but sending tons and tons of drones into Ukraine and sending off air raid sirens every 5 minutes over the course of Easter. According to the Washington Post, Kyiv is expected to respond to a new U.S. proposal in talks in London starting Wednesday, and including representatives from the United States, Britain, and France. The talks will take place in the shadow of the apparently futile 30-hour truce. Now, again, Zelensky said, let's turn that into, like a 30-day truce. And maybe that turns into an armistice, which, by the way, is the most likely outcome here. There will be no peace agreement. There will be no peace agreement because Ukraine is not going to simply cede the territory in the east of the country and the Crimea.
Even if they did, it's irrelevant. Putin wouldn't respect it, in my opinion. I believe that Putin intends to just take all of Ukraine, take all of the Soviet Union territories back. I believe that is the goal, and he's not going to stop until he gets it. And, this is famously what Neville Chamberlain did in World War II, or leading up to it. He appeased imperialism. He appeased them. He said, okay, fine. You can just take this little thing right here. You can have it. Just leave us alone now. Just stop. Specifically said, if you don't take any more territory, then we'll just let you have Czechoslovakia. And Hitler said, oh yeah, of course. All right, deal. I won't. And then he took Poland, of course, like 6 months later. Appeasement does not work with imperialists. Appeasement invariably ends with people just like losing ground and the imperialists taking ground. We shouldn't give up a single piece of territory, nothing. We should take Crimea back. We should not allow Russia to take the region, period. Not one blade of grass. Because if we allow it to happen, which is what's going on right now, the United States, it's, he's not going to stop. He's just going to keep going because he knows he can get away with it. Sanction the shit out of them and arm Ukraine to the teeth. It's embarrassing a historical adversary, somebody that views himself as an adversary of the United States. And it's showing the world that imperialism is not acceptable. But the United States, Trump, he doesn't give a fuck about that anymore. So Russia is just getting what they want. And by the end of it, Russia is going to own all of Ukraine, I believe, unless something dramatic changes.
To Russia, and Russia is not going to settle for that. So the most likely outcome here, if you were to get to any outcome at all, looks sort of like the Korean War, which, by the way, is still technically ongoing. There's an armistice agreement signed in 1953, but there's no actual technical agreement by South Korea that North Korea is not its territory, and there's no agreement by North Korea that South Korea is not its territory. It's just...
Yeah, that's true.
There's a hardened battle line right there, and then it's basically been set up as a demilitarized zone. That is the most likely scenario and outcome in what's going on in Ukraine. But in order to even get there, you have to have a perception by the Russians they're not going to get much more. That everyone needs to go weapons down because the costs of not going weapons down are too high.
Exactly. He's totally 100% correct here. Yes.
Yeah, there's been a lot of focus placed on, for example, the rare earth minerals deal that the United States is now going to sign with the Ukrainians, that this is going to essentially provide for an informal security arrangement with the Ukrainians. You can see why the Ukrainians are a little bit skeptical of that, considering that in 2017, the United States actually did sign a rare earth minerals deal with Afghanistan. And within a few years,
I didn't know that. Interesting. Wow.
Afghanistan was totally overtaken by the Taliban. So again, I'm waiting to see the negotiating genius of Steve Witkoff. Like, bring it, dude. Let's see it. Already coming up, we'll get to Coachella, which unleashed.
I'm surprised that I did not hear anything that I explicitly disagree with regarding the Ukraine stuff from Ben Shapiro. Did Ben Shapiro do a bunch of research on this and come to good conclusions? Is that what happened? Anyway, it looks like that's over. That's absolutely fascinating. Tell me what you think about it in the comments.